The fate of empires once hinged on a simple wall of stone in the water. We are uncovering the stories of 15 ancient artificial harbors, the forgotten engines that built our world. By the end, you will see history from an entirely new perspective, through the waves that carried civilizations to glory. How did a secret naval dockyard fuel a century of war? And why would a conqueror dig a harbor 2 miles from the sea? These stone labyrinths were more than ports. They were masterpieces of ambition that redrew the map of human connection. What does it truly mean to build a gateway to the world? The story of artificial harbors begins with a masterpiece of paranoia and power. On the coast of what is now Tunisia, the Phoenician traders of Carthage faced a constant threat, not just from the open sea, but from the rivals watching its shores. Their solution was the cothon, a harbor that was less a port and more a fortress designed for the water. Imagine a massive, perfectly circular lagoon carved into the coastline, its entrance a narrow, easily defended channel. This was the outer ring, bustling with merchant ships carrying grain, silver, and precious purple dyes. But the true genius and the true secret lay inside. At the center of this commercial circle was an island, and ringing that island was a second, hidden harbor. This inner sanctum was a naval dockyard, a secure base that could shelter and rapidly deploy over 200 warships. Archaeologists like Henry Hurst call it a machine for controlling the sea. Every stone was placed with intention, the entire complex functioning like a locked vault for naval power. Its sophisticated lock systems controlled water levels, allowing for dry docking and rapid repairs, turning the fleet into a persistent, looming threat. This harbor did not just facilitate trade, it weaponized it, funneling immense wealth directly into Carthage's capacity for war and defining its bitter rivalry with Rome. The end of this story is written in the harbor's own stones. When Rome finally conquered Carthage in the year 146 before Common Era, the victory was not complete until they systematically destroyed the cothon. They understood that to truly defeat a civilization, you must dismantle the engine that drove it. The obliteration of this harbor was a deliberate act, ensuring that Carthage's logistical heart could never beat again. In its circular design, we see the blueprint of an empire's ambition, and in its shattered remains, the stark lesson that these ports were the ultimate strategic prize. This concept of a harbor as a deliberate, monumental statement of control leads us to a different kind of statement entirely, one built not for secrecy, but for sheer, undeniable glory. Rome's answer to chaos was geometry on a staggering scale. While Carthage built a secret war machine, imperial Rome faced a crisis of its own success. The Tiber River port at Ostia was drowning in its own traffic, a tangled bottleneck of ships carrying the grain that fed over 1 million citizens in the capital. A single storm, a season of delays, and the entire city would face hunger and unrest. Emperor Claudius saw the solution not in expanding the old port, but in starting from scratch. His engineers chose a marshy coastal plain 2 miles from the open sea and began to dig. The result was Portus, a vast, artificial circular basin connected to the sea by a new canal and guarded by a lighthouse said to rival the Pharaohs. This was more than a dock, it was a hydrological fortress, creating calm waters where the Mediterranean's fury was held at bay. The scale was almost incomprehensible, a harbor so large its primary problem became the silting of its own entrance. But Rome was just getting started. Decades later, Emperor Trajan looked at Claudius's great circle and saw an opportunity for perfection. He ordered the excavation of a second, inner basin in the shape of a perfect hexagon. This was the masterstroke. The hexagonal port was a marvel of efficiency. its 6 sides lined with warehouses and docks that acted like a giant sorting machine for the empire. Ships from Egypt disgorged mountains of grain. Vessels from Spain delivered rivers of olive oil. Others arrived with exotic woods from North Africa, precious metals from Britain, and even wild animals destined for the games. Historian Simon Key describes Portus as the logistical hub of the empire, the central processor in a vast network of tax, redistribution, and control. Every amphora, every sack of wheat was counted, taxed, and redirected, its movement a testament to Roman administration. This harbor was the empire's beating heart, a man-made organ that pumped sustenance and luxury directly into Rome's veins. Its very existence transformed the Mediterranean into a Roman lake, stabilizing trade routes and economies for centuries. To stand at its edge was to witness the raw, organized might of an empire that could literally reshape the coastline to guarantee its own survival. But what happens when such a harbor is built not for an emperor's administration, but for a king's divine ambition? From the systematic logic of Rome, we journey to a desert shore where a pharaoh sought to build a gateway to a mythical land. Alexander the Great saw not a coastline, but a blank canvas. On a narrow strip of land between the Mediterranean and a vast lake, he envisioned a city to bridge worlds, but the shore itself offered only a treacherous sandbar and a lonely island called Pharos. The genius of Alexandria was not just its famous library, but the audacious act of civil engineering that made the library possible. To create a harbor where none existed, his successors ordered the construction of the Heptastadion, a causeway over 3,000 feet long that tamed the open sea. This man-made land bridge did more than connect an island. It transformed the geography, creating 2 immense sheltered basins, the Great Harbor and the Eunostos Harbor. Suddenly, the most dangerous coast became the safest port in the Mediterranean. Into these engineered havens sailed the wealth of the known world. Ships from Rome carried marble and wine, while vessels from the east, braving the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, arrived heavy with pepper from India, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, and silk from distant China. The legendary lighthouse towering on the island of Pharos was more than a wonder of the world. It was the practical symbol of this new safety, a beacon of fire and polished bronze mirrors that could be seen from 30 miles out, guiding this global traffic home. The historian Strabo called Alexandria the greatest marketplace in the inhabited world, and it was this artificial harbor that served as its front door. But the true cargo was often intangible. Alongside the spices and silks came ideas, manuscripts, and scholars, all funneled through this secure port to the great library. The harbor's calm waters protected not just ships, but the flow of knowledge itself, making Alexandria a crossroads where Greek philosophy met Egyptian astronomy and Indian mathematics. This engineered haven created a stability that lasted for centuries, long after Alexander's empire faded, setting trade routes and intellectual exchanges that would shape history for 1,000 years. It proved that a harbor could be a conduit for light in every sense, guiding ships to shore and human thought toward new horizons. To find another harbor that mastered such vast, rhythmic trade, we must leave the Mediterranean entirely and sail with the seasonal winds of a much greater ocean. While Alexandria mastered the monsoon winds, another civilization 4,000 years earlier had already perfected the rhythm of the tides. On the flat plains of modern-day Gujarat, India, the Harappan city of Lothal presents a puzzle of extraordinary foresight. Here, far from the open ocean on a tributary of the Sabarmati River, engineers constructed the world's earliest known tidal dockyard. The design was breathtaking in its simplicity and precision. They excavated a massive, brick-lined basin, connecting it to the river channel through a narrow inlet. But the true innovation was a clever wooden gate, a locking mechanism that harnessed the predictable, powerful tides of the Gulf of Combat. At high tide, the gate would be opened, allowing the surging seawater to flood the basin and float docked ships for easy unloading. When the tide receded, the gate was closed, trapping the precious water inside to maintain a stable, deep harbor. This was Bronze Age engineering thinking centuries ahead, creating a reliable port in a location nature never intended. Lothal was not an isolated dock. It was the beating heart of a meticulously planned city. Excavations led by archaeologist S.R. Rao revealed a settlement built to a grid, with uniform brick sizes, covered drains, and orderly warehouses lining the wharves. Every artifact tells a story of meticulous commerce, from the tiny, exquisitely drilled carnelian beads that were a Harappan specialty, to the standardized stone weights and seals bearing the mysterious Indus script. These seals, found as far away as Mesopotamia, are the silent receipts of a vast trade network. Ships from Lothal likely carried timber, copper, ivory, and those brilliant beads westward, returning with silver, textiles, and perhaps the Mesopotamian tin needed for bronze. The harbor was the linchpin of an integrated economic zone, connecting the rich agricultural hinterlands of the Indus Valley to maritime routes stretching across the Arabian Sea. Its very existence forces us to rewrite our understanding of early globalization. This was not haphazard trade, but a managed, systematic exchange governed by a sophisticated and centralized administration that understood logistics, measurement, and the value of a guaranteed berth. The decline of Lothal around 1900 before Common Era, linked to the broader fading of the Harappan cities, leaves its precise fate shrouded in the silt that eventually filled its brilliant dock. Yet its legacy is indelible, a testament to the deep human urge to connect, to systematize, and to build gateways that turn local resources into global influence. This mastery of river and sea would find a starkly different expression far to the north, where another empire would carve a harbor not for beads and copper, but for the grain that fueled its relentless conquests. A desert kingdom's wealth flowed not from gold mines but from the scent of sacred trees. The Nabateans, the master architects of Petra, understood that controlling a trade route meant controlling every point of access, including the sea. On the stark eastern shore of the Red Sea, they engineered Leucombe, the White Village, a harbor that functioned as a brilliant fiscal trap. Imagine a barren coastline suddenly bustling with ships from Roman Egypt, their hulls packed with wine, fine glassware, and metals. These goods were not the final prize, they were the currency. The real treasure arrived on camel caravans from the south, carrying the most valuable commodities of the ancient world, frankincense and myrrh. Leucombe was the engineered meeting point, a man-made interface where sea logistics met desert caravan networks. The Roman geographer Strabo provides a crucial detail. He notes that Nabatean tax collectors at this port imposed a duty of 25% on all incoming luxury goods. This was not a simple tax, it was a masterstroke of economic control. By placing their artificial harbor right at this maritime gateway, the Nabateans created a mandatory customs bottleneck. Every ounce of incense bound for temples and homes across the Roman Empire had to pass through their fiscal filter, its value inflated before it even began the overland journey to Petra and northward. The harbor itself, likely fortified with breakwaters and stone quays to create calm waters in the treacherous Red Sea, was a secure compound for this lucrative exchange. Its success transformed the Red Sea from a barren passage into a commercial corridor, linking the spices of India and the wealth of Africa directly to the Greco-Roman world. The Nabateans did not just build a port, they built a monopoly. Leucombe was a valve deliberately installed to regulate the flow of an entire industry, proving that the most powerful harbors are those that control not just ships but the very price of desire. This model of a harbor as an instrument of pure economic and political power finds its ultimate expression in a different sea, built not by merchant kings, but by a successor of Alexander the Great who sought to dominate the entire eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes was an island built by merchants for the business of peace. Following the city's unification in 408 before Common Era, its leaders undertook a staggering feat of engineering, carving not one but two massive artificial harbors into its coastline. On one side lay the commercial harbor, a bustling nexus for the grain, wine, and olive oil that fueled the Mediterranean economy. Directly connected yet strategically separate was the war harbor, a fortified naval base shielded by immense stone breakwaters called moles. The legendary Colossus, one of the Seven Wonders, may have stood astride the entrance, a bronze titan welcoming the world's ships while symbolizing the island's unshakable stability. This dual harbor system was a masterclass in urban planning, separating the flow of commerce from the machinery of defense while keeping both under one city's control. But Rhodes's true power was not merely in its stone, but in the rules it wrote upon the water. From this harbor complex emerged the Rhodian Sea Law, a comprehensive legal code governing everything from shipping contracts to jettisoned cargo. When a storm forced a captain to throw goods overboard to save the ship, the Rhodians decreed that all merchants who benefited from the lighter vessel must share the cost of the lost cargo. This principle of general average is still a cornerstone of maritime insurance today. The harbor was more than a port. It was a courtroom and a diplomatic chamber made of water and stone. Rhodes positioned itself as the neutral middleman in an age of warring Hellenistic kingdoms, its secure harbors offering a safe zone where rivals from Egypt, Syria, and Macedon could dock, trade, and negotiate. Its fleet guaranteed the security of the sea lanes, particularly for the vital grain shipments from the Black Sea to the hungry cities of the south. The infrastructure created trust, and that trust built an economic empire. The decline of this powerhouse began with a devastating earthquake that toppled the Colossus and damaged the moles, followed by the Roman designation of Delos as a tax-free port, which siphoned away its commercial lifeblood. Yet the legacy of Rhodes endured in the laws that continued to govern the waves long after its harbor silted up, proving that the most enduring structures a port can build are not made of stone, but of principle and precedent. This idea of a harbor as a personal instrument of power, however, would be taken to a literal extreme by a king who did not just build a port, but moved a mountain to create one. Democracy itself was fed by a steady stream of imported grain. The story of Athens' golden age is inseparable from the engineered harbor complex at Piraeus, a masterwork of foresight that turned naval strategy into civic survival. While the site offered natural bays, the Athenian leader Themistocles saw only vulnerability. His vision transformed Piraeus from a simple anchorage into a fortified, fully planned artificial port, a military and commercial machine protected by the famous long walls. These parallel ramparts created a fortified corridor, a stone artery 5 miles long that physically linked the harbor to the city, ensuring that even under siege, Athens could never be cut off from the sea. Within the secure basins of Piraeus, every function had its place. In the military zone, the Athenian trireme fleet, numbering in the hundreds, was housed in long, covered ship sheds that kept the vessels dry, safe, and ready for launch at a moment's notice. Just a short distance away, the commercial emporium bustled with merchants from Egypt, Sicily, and the Black Sea, their goods taxed to fund the city's ambitions. This systematic separation of military and commercial traffic was a revolutionary concept in urban planning, creating efficiency and security in equal measure. The historian Thucydides pinpointed this as the core of Athenian power, noting that their empire was in essence an empire of the sea. The harbor's true purpose, however, was breathtakingly simple: to guarantee the arrival of grain. Each year, a vast fleet of merchant ships made the perilous journey from the fertile plains around the Black Sea, carrying the thousands of tons of wheat needed to feed Athens' population. Without this lifeline, the city's democracy, its courts, its public festivals, and its citizen army would simply cease to function. The silver mines of Laurium funded the ships that protected the lanes that brought the bread that sustained the assembly. It was a perfect, precarious circuit. The ultimate proof of Piraeus' importance came not in its glory, but in its fall. When Sparta finally captured the port in 404 before Common Era, Athens had no choice but to surrender. The heart had been stopped. Piraeus shows us that the grandest political experiments are built on the most practical foundations, that the right to vote was underwritten by the right of way across the waves. This deep connection between a harbor and the identity of a civilization finds a powerful echo far to the north, where another seafaring people built a port that served as the literal doorway to a continent. A Roman merchant would pay any price to avoid the land routes through Parthia. The answer lay not in a faster ship, but in a ditch dug through the desert. At the northernmost finger of the Red Sea, the Romans perfected a port called Clysma, transforming a forgotten pharaonic dream into the empire's direct line to the riches of the East. This was not merely a harbor, it was the final piece of a 3,000-year-old puzzle. Pharaohs from Senusret III to Necho II had attempted to cut a canal from the Nile to the Red Sea, a project of legendary difficulty and cost. The Romans, under Emperor Trajan, did not just revive this canal, they integrated it into a complete logistical machine. Clysma was the engineered socket where this canal met the sea, a fortified artificial basin with stone quays, vast warehouses, and a permanent military garrison. Its purpose was breathtakingly specific: to receive the monumental cargoes arriving from a journey most Romans could scarcely imagine. Picture a ship from the Tamil kingdoms of southern India, its timbers creaking after months on the monsoon winds, finally docking at Clysma's wharves. Its hold was a treasure chest of the ancient world, brimming with sacks of black pepper, raw silk, precious gems, and exotic spices like nard and costus. Here, in the secure confines of the Roman port, this oceanic cargo was unloaded, counted by imperial officials, and transferred onto a fleet of shallow draft river barges. The journey then turned west, floating up the man-made canal to the Nile, then down the great river to Alexandria, where the goods would again be transferred onto Mediterranean ships bound for the markets of Rome. This transshipment hub effectively moved the Roman border thousands of miles to the east. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st-century merchant's guidebook, lists Clysma as a primary destination, noting the schedules of the monsoon winds one had to catch to reach it. By creating this secure, state-managed node, Rome made the direct maritime route to India not just possible, but consistently profitable. It broke the monopoly of overland middlemen and funneled the lucrative Indo-Roman trade directly into the imperial treasury, taxing it at every transfer point. The harbor's success redefined the map, stitching the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean economies into a single, if delicate, system. Its eventual fading, tied to the empire's own fragmentation and the slow silting of its critical canal, did not erase its achievement. Clysma proved that global trade could be engineered, that with enough will and mortar, you could build a shortcut through geography itself. This concept of a harbor as a sacred, protected transfer point finds a stunning parallel in a very different culture, one that turned a holy lake into a commercial vortex. A harbor's purpose is not always to face the open sea. Deep in the arid Fayum oasis, a full day's journey southwest of the Nile, the pharaohs of Egypt's Middle Kingdom performed a miracle of hydrological ambition. They did not build a port on an existing lake, they created the lake itself to serve as a port. Under rulers like Amenemhat I, engineers executed a colossal project, redirecting and controlling the annual Nile floodwaters through a natural channel called the Bahr Yusuf. Their goal was to fill a vast natural depression, creating the immense artificial reservoir known to the Greeks as Lake Moeris. This was not a passive body of water, it was a managed machine, a giant regulatory valve for the entire region. Along its newly formed shores, they constructed harbor installations, most notably at the city of Shedit, which the Greeks would later call Crocodilopolis. Imagine the scene at this inland port, a world away from any ocean. Barges and riverboats heavy with the bounty of the newly fertile Fayum, grain harvested from fields watered by the lake's controlled release, bundles of precious papyrus, and blocks of limestone quarried from the surrounding hills, all being loaded for a journey north. These vessels would sail from the lake's harbors, back into the canal system, and onto the Nile itself, integrating this once isolated oasis directly into the economic heart of the kingdom. The lake's harbors were the critical transfer points in this system, turning local abundance into national wealth. This infrastructure transformed the Fayum into the breadbasket of Egypt, its surplus grain supporting population growth and financing the massive construction projects of the pharaohs. The entire enterprise demonstrated a staggering level of environmental mastery, using water engineering not for conquest but for profound economic integration. Lake Moeris and its ports answered a fundamental question. Yes, a harbor could exist far from the sea, not as a gateway to the world, but as a tool for domestic empire building, binding a kingdom together from the inside out. This concept of a harbor as a deeply integrated cultural and economic nexus finds its ultimate expression in a very different part of the ancient world, where a single port city became a legendary melting pot of continents. A river's mouth can be the most treacherous place to build a harbor, yet also the most rewarding. At the shifting, silt-choked delta where the mighty Indus River meets the Arabian Sea, the ancient port of Barbaricon performed a constant act of defiance against nature. Mentioned in the 1st century merchant's guidebook, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, this was not a natural haven but an engineered anchorage, a gateway carved into the mud by the Parthians and later powers to tap into a continental treasure stream. Its existence answered a profound logistical question: how do you connect the open ocean to the heart of a subcontinent? The answer lay in dredging channels through the unstable delta and constructing stone wharves where the land itself seemed to dissolve into water, creating a rare point of stable access in an otherwise impassable landscape. Into this manufactured calm sailed ships from the distant Roman world, their holds filled with gold coinage, silver ingots, and amphorae of fine wine. They came not for conquest but for exchange. At Barbaricon's docks, this Mediterranean wealth was traded for the legendary luxuries funneled down the Indus River from the interior. Caravans from northern India and Central Asia converged upstream, unloading bales of fine cotton cloth, sacks of pungent spices, brilliant indigo dye, and precious lapis lazuli and carnelian gemstones onto river barges. These goods then made the final journey down river to the waiting sea captains. Barbaricon was the critical transfer point, the customs house where the economies of Rome and India physically met. This made the port far more than a commercial warehouse. It was a vibrant cultural interface. Greek merchants haggled with Indian traders under Persian-influenced administration. Alongside the spices and silks, ideas and beliefs moved through the port. Coins, ceramics, and artistic motifs found here show a unique blend of Hellenistic, Indian, and Persian styles, evidence of a society shaped by constant exchange. A merchant might hear tales of the Buddha from a traveler from Gandhara, or discuss Zoroastrian principles with a Parthian official, all while inspecting the quality of Sindh-high cotton. Barbaricon thrived because it solved a geographic problem, turning a volatile river mouth into a controlled valve. By mastering that difficult transition from river to sea, it unlocked the immense interior wealth of the Indian subcontinent for the global market, proving that a harbor's greatest power is its ability to simplify the complex map of human movement. This model of a port as a cultural and economic crucible, built against geographic odds, finds a stunning parallel on the other side of the Indian Ocean, where a forgotten African kingdom anchored its identity to a man-made shore. A kingdom's heart can beat from a mountain throne, but its voice must carry across the water, far from the Mediterranean's familiar shores. On the sun-baked coast of the Red Sea in modern-day Erythraea, the Aksumite Empire built its global megaphone. They transformed a natural bay called Adulis into a formidable artificial harbor, constructing massive stone breakwaters to calm the treacherous currents and lining the shore with sturdy piers and warehouses. This was no simple anchorage, it was a deliberate statement of power, the maritime gateway for a kingdom whose capital lay hundreds of miles inland, high in the Ethiopian highlands. To stand on its engineered docks was to witness the pulse of an ancient globalization. Aksumite coins, inscribed in both Ge'ez and Greek for universal recognition, jingled in the hands of merchants from Rome, Persia, and southern India. Their ships, having braved the monsoon winds, were unloaded of fine textiles, glassware, and wine. In return, they took on the legendary treasures of the African interior, colossal tusks of ivory, raw gold, precious tortoiseshell, and even exotic live animals destined for distant menageries. The 6th century merchant and traveler Cosmas Indicopleustes called Adulis a lawful port of trade, a phrase that hints at its order and reliability in a volatile world. The wealth that flowed through this engineered port was the lifeblood of Aksum's grandeur. It funded the carving and erection of those monumental stone obelisks, the stelae of the capital, some standing over 100 feet tall, and it built the lavish palaces from which Aksumite kings claimed descent from the biblical Solomon. By mastering this single point on the coast, Aksum projected its influence across the Red Sea into Arabia and positioned itself as the indispensable middleman between the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean worlds, a peer and rival to Persia and Rome. The harbor's success, however, contained the seeds of its vulnerability. The very silt washed down from the highland plains that enriched the empire began to slowly choke the harbor's basins. This gradual silting, combined with shifting trade routes, slowly muted Aksum's global voice, demonstrating that even the most brilliant artificial harbor exists in a fragile conversation with the land it masters. Adulis answers our question profoundly. A harbor gives an inland kingdom a global voice by turning geography into an instrument, translating continental wealth into international influence. This sophisticated model of maritime control, however, was not a new invention. Centuries earlier, and in a very different sea, another island civilization had perfected the art of the harbor as a protected, ritualized gateway to the world. The power of an empire often rests in its quietest places, on the sun-bleached southern coast of Crete, far from the grand palaces of Knossos. The Minoans built a harbor of pure purpose at Kamos. This was not a city or a royal dockyard, but a masterfully engineered transit hub, a Bronze Age service station carved from the shoreline. Its defining features were immense piers constructed from perfectly cut ashlar blocks, stone giants reaching into the deep water to welcome ships that had braved the open sea between Egypt and the Aegean. Imagine a weary vessel, its timbers strained from weeks of sailing, finally gliding into the calm water behind Kamos's long, man-made breakwaters. Here, in this secure anchorage, crews could find fresh water, make repairs on stone ramps designed for hauling ships ashore, and trade for supplies before embarking on the next perilous leg. The archaeology speaks of constant, bustling exchange, with fragments of Egyptian alabaster jars, Canaanite storage containers, and Cypriot pottery scattered in the soil like permanent receipts. Kamos had no lavish throne room because its function was its grandeur. It existed to facilitate movement, to be the reliable node in a web that stretched across the eastern Mediterranean. This network carried the essential ingredients of Bronze Age civilization, Cypriot copper and tin from farther east to alloy into bronze, fine Minoan pottery, and luxury goods like olive oil and woven textiles. The harbor's sophisticated design, with its deep water access and monumental stonework, reveals a culture with profound maritime knowledge, one that understood the sea not as a barrier but as a connective highway. Cosmos answers a fundamental question about ancient trade. The network itself was only as strong as its weakest link. Palaces could command, but without these secure, utilitarian way stations offering respite and repair, the long-distance voyages that brought wealth and ideas would have been impossible. This humble port was the critical linchpin that sustained the Minoan thalassocracy, proving that the true backbone of a sea empire is often found in the quiet, sturdy places where the voyage pauses. From this essential way station, we see a different harbor philosophy emerge, one built not for pause, but for permanent settlement in the face of overwhelming change. A harbor can be a city's greatest vulnerability or its ultimate stronghold. On a small island just off the western coast of Sicily, the Phoenician colony of Motia chose the latter, transforming its entire settlement into a maritime fortress. The first line of defense was not a wall, but the sea itself. Engineers constructed a unique submerged causeway, a road that lay just beneath the surface, connecting the island to the mainland. This ingenious feature was only usable at low tide, allowing for controlled access while leaving the city isolated and unreachable by ship during high water, a natural moat on a grand scale. But the true marvel lay within the city walls. Here, the Phoenicians excavated an artificial inner harbor, a cothon, a perfect rectangular basin carved from the living rock. This was more than a dock, it was a sealed vault for ships. Vessels returning from long voyages across the Mediterranean could be hauled out of the open water, through a narrow entrance, and into this completely sheltered pool, safe from prying eyes, sudden storms, or any attacking fleet. Within this secure compound, repairs were made, cargoes were stored in adjacent warehouses, and crews rested, all protected by the city's formidable fortifications. Motia was a critical linchpin in a vast commercial circuit, its ships carrying Sardinian silver, Spanish tin, and the famed Tyrian purple dye from North Africa, goods that fueled economies and denoted status across the ancient world. This harbor design was a direct reflection of a precarious existence, surrounded by the expanding Greek colonies of Sicily, particularly the powerful city of Syracuse to the east. Motia lived under constant threat. Its harbor was not built for open welcome, but for controlled survival. For decades, this system worked perfectly, allowing the city to withstand blockades and raids, its submerged causeway and hidden inner basin proving a frustrating puzzle for any besieging force. The end came not from a failure of engineering, but from overwhelming force. In 397 before Common Era, the tyrant Dionysius I of Syracuse launched a massive assault, building a mole to bridge the water and finally breach the walls. The destruction was total, marking a decisive end to Phoenician hegemony in these waters. Motia's harbor answers our question with stone and seawater. Its very blueprint is a map of anxiety and ingenuity, showing that for a merchant colony in hostile seas, the ideal port is not an open door but a locked room. This philosophy of the harbor as a secure, inland transfer point reaches its logical extreme not on an island, but at the very crossroads of continents, where a desert empire built its gateway to the Silk Road. A fragment of Italian pottery in southern India tells a story of winds that could not be resisted. At Arikamedu, on the Coromandel coast near modern Pondicherry, the monsoon did not just bring rain, it brought the Roman world. Here, from the 2nd century before Common Era to the 2nd century Common Era, a bustling port settlement grew not from a natural bay, but from deliberate construction. Excavations led by archaeologists like Mortimer Wheeler revealed the bones of this ambition: stone-lined wharves and massive brick warehouses built to withstand the seasonal fury and manage a trade of staggering distance. The ground itself is a ledger of global exchange, where shards of distinctive Roman amphorae that once held wine or olive oil lie mingled with fine, red gloss Erythraean pottery from Italy and delicate glass fragments from Alexandria. Right beside them are local black and red ware ceramics and the remains of enormous dyeing vats used for the vibrant cottons that were a specialty of the region. This was no accidental meeting. It was a sustained, engineered partnership. Historians believe Arikamedu is the port, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, called Portus, a named destination for Roman merchants willing to gamble on the monsoon. Once a year, they would catch the southwest winds from the Red Sea, a voyage of over 4,000 miles across open ocean to reach this manufactured harbor. They came bearing gold coins, wine, and fine tableware, Mediterranean luxuries for local elites. In return, they loaded their ships with the treasures of the Tamil country: brilliant pearls from the Gulf of Mannar, precious gems like sapphires and beryls, pungent black pepper, and above all, the legendary feather-light cotton textiles the Romans called muslin, so fine they were said to be woven from wind. The artificial facilities at Arikamedu were the crucial interface, the secure platform where this high-risk, high-reward exchange could be standardized and scaled. Its existence rewrites the map of ancient economics. This was not trade by cautious coastal hopping, but a direct, audacious leap across the Indian Ocean, made possible by profound nautical skill and the engineering of a reliable port at the journey's end. That solitary piece of Roman pottery is therefore a coordinate, marking the farthest eastern point of a commercial network that saw the Mediterranean and South India not as separate worlds, but as connected markets. It speaks of an ambition that viewed geography as a challenge to be solved with sail, stone, and sheer nerve. This model of a harbor as the terminal of a direct oceanic highway finds its echo in a final, monumental project, one built not by a republic of merchants, but by a single king seeking to outshine all others. The final harbor is a monument to a war against the river itself. Seleucus I, a general of Alexander the Great, founded the mighty inland capital of Antioch, but a capital needs a seaward lung. He chose a spot at the mouth of the Orontes River and named it Seleucia Pieria, the port of Antioch. From its first stone, this harbor was engaged in a hopeless, heroic fight. The Orontes, draining the highlands of Syria, carried a relentless torrent of silt down to the coast, a natural process that saw the Mediterranean not as a destination, but as a dumping ground. To keep the harbor functional, Seleucid and later Roman engineers waged a perpetual campaign. They constructed long, stone breakwaters or moles to deflect currents and create calm water. They dug and redug dredging channels, a back-breaking task repeated season after season. They even cut diversionary canals in attempts to redirect the river's silt-laden flow. The geographer Strabo recorded both its critical importance and its ceaseless troubles, a place where imperial wealth was poured directly into the water just to keep the water accessible. When it worked, Seleucia Pieria was the indispensable valve. Goods from across the Mediterranean, from Egyptian grain to Italian metals, flowed into its secured basins. From there, they were transferred onto river barges for the short journey up the Orontes to Antioch, the metropolis that served as the western anchor of the Silk Road. In the opposite direction, luxuries from the east, silk and spices, began their journey to the wider world through this engineered gateway. The harbor's success was the city's success. But the river never slept. Despite centuries of expenditure and ingenuity, the silt finally won. The basins filled in, the wharves were buried, and the deep water access faded into a marshy plain. As the harbor died, so too did much of Antioch's unique advantage. Its commercial lifeblood slowly throttled. The story of Seleucia Pieria asks a profound question. Is the destiny of a harbor, and thus of the empire it serves, ultimately written not by kings and engineers, but by the patient, unstoppable logic of a river? This 15-harbor journey ends here, not with a single triumph, but with a pattern. From Carthage's secret war machine to the Romans' hexagonal sorting hub, from the monsoon chasing docks of India to the silt-choked gates of Antioch, these stone labyrinths were never just about ships. They were the physical expressions of human ambition, the points where geography was forced to comply with desire. Each one tells a story of a civilization answering a fundamental need for security, for food, for wealth, for knowledge, or simply for connection. They were tools of control, engines of economy, and catalysts for cultural fusion. Their rises built worlds, and their falls often foreshadowed the end of an era. To study them is to see history not as a list of battles and kings, but as a map of logistics, a network of deliberate choices made in stone and water. They remind us that before an idea could change the world, a ship had to dock safely, and someone, long ago, had to decide to build a wall against the sea. These 15 stories are not isolated marvels. They are chapters from the same grand narrative of human ambition. Stepping back, a powerful pattern emerges, one that transcends geography and century. At their core, these harbors were the ultimate exercise in applied power, a deliberate act of bending geology to political will. A king did not simply find a bay, he ordered one dug, demanding that the coastline itself conform to his empire's needs. This was not passive construction, it was an assertion of dominance over the natural world, a declaration that the flow of history would now follow these engineered channels. With each successful port, a fascinating phenomenon took hold, the network effect. Like the first telephone making all others more valuable, a single reliable harbor in a dangerous sea did not just serve its own city, it increased the value of every other connected port. A merchant sailing from Alexandria could now plan a journey to Rome with confidence, because he knew the secure harbors of Rhodes and Piraeus lay along the route. This web of safety and predictability attracted more ships, which carried more goods, which funded more infrastructure, creating a virtuous cycle that lifted entire regional economies. The harbor was the node, but the true power was in the connection. The technology behind these nodes reveals an evolving science written in stone and water. Consider the spectrum of innovation, from the Harappans at Lothal, mastering the predictable pulse of the tides with a simple wooden gate, to the Carthaginians designing their locked, circular cothon as a machine for naval warfare. The Romans at Portus moved from a massive circle to a hyper-efficient hexagon, refining the concept of the harbor as a sorting and tax collection facility. This was not random experimentation. It was a cumulative engineering tradition where knowledge of hydraulics, materials, and logistics was passed, adapted, and improved across centuries and cultures. Inevitably, such concentrations of wealth and control became flashpoints. The harbor was the choke point, and to control it was to control the lifeblood of a rival. The obliteration of Carthage's cothon was Rome's final, symbolic act of victory. The Spartan capture of Piraeus meant the immediate surrender of Athens. These were not ancillary targets, they were the primary objective, because severing this logistical artery was more decisive than any battle on land. The rise and fall of these stone complexes serve as a stark barometer of civilizational health. Their silting up, like at Seleucia Pieria or eventually Adulis, often signaled a slow, structural decline, an empire losing the will or resources to fight its own geography. An earthquake damaging the moles of Rhodes could trigger an economic crisis. Conquest, of course, was the swiftest end. Yet, for all their role in conflict, these engineered gateways performed a quieter, more enduring miracle. They became unparalleled crucibles for cultural exchange. On the docks of Barbaricon or Alexandria, commodities were not the only cargo. A Greek idea could board a ship with a sack of pepper. A Buddhist teaching might travel alongside a bale of Chinese silk. Languages blended, artistic styles hybridized, and religions found new pathways across the water. The harbor was a marketplace for the mind as much as for material goods, facilitating a diffusion of culture on a scale previously unimaginable. Seen through this lens, these ancient artificial harbors were far more than mere infrastructure. They were the physical internet of their day, a pre-digital network of nodes and connections that moved information, value, and belief at the speed of sail. They teach us a timeless, dual lesson about connectivity. Their immense power to build wealth and fuse cultures demonstrates that our greatest advancements spring from open channels of exchange. But their constant targeting in war and their vulnerability to natural decay reveal the profound fragility inherent in such systems. A network empowers, but it also creates single points of catastrophic failure. The stone that welcomes the world also makes a magnificent target. This delicate balance between opportunity and vulnerability, engineered into every breakwater and basin, is perhaps their most enduring legacy, a lesson etched not in scrolls but in the very shape of the shore. The circular fortress of Carthage and the monsoon ports of India share a common blueprint, one drawn not on parchment, but on the coastline itself. Each of these 15 ancient harbors was a declaration, a statement that the chaotic sea would be tamed, that distance would be conquered, and that a community's fate would be secured by its own ingenuity. They reshaped the world by doing something deceptively simple. They created points of safety in a dangerous expanse. By carving out these artificial basins and raising these protective moles, engineers gave merchants a priceless commodity: predictability. A captain could now plan a voyage from Rome to India, not as a leap into the unknown, but as a series of reliable stops. This network of safe harbors amplified everything. It increased the volume of goods, from Egyptian grain to Indian pepper. It accelerated the speed at which they moved, and it lowered the immense risk that had once made long-distance trade a gamble for only the brave or the desperate. The flow of material wealth, however, was just the beginning. In the wake of the spice ships and grain carriers came something even more transformative: the flow of ideas. A new philosophy could dock with a shipment of olive oil. A foreign artistic style might arrive alongside a bale of silk. These ports were the original melting pots, where languages blended and beliefs cross-pollinated on the bustling wharves. The economic ambition behind them was staggering, often the sole purpose of an empire's treasury. Yet for all their engineered might, their existence was perpetually fragile. They stood in a permanent struggle against two relentless forces: the patience of nature and the tumult of history. Silt slowly filled the basins of Seleucia Pieria despite the best Roman engineering. Earthquakes shattered the mighty moles of Rhodes, and as we saw, the ultimate vulnerability was human ambition itself. For a harbor that made an empire rich also made it a target. The obliteration of Carthage's cothon was a deliberate act of economic and symbolic murder. When we look at the sprawling container ports of today, with their gantry cranes and digital logistics networks, we are not looking at something new. We are seeing the direct descendants of these ancient marvels. The principles are unchanged: a secure anchorage, an efficient system for transferring cargo from one mode of transport to another, and the strategic control of a geographic choke point. The scale is different, the technology has evolved, but the core goal of connecting, controlling, and profiting from the movement of goods remains the driving force. The mysteries of how these ancient ports were built and operated continue to captivate us. How did the Harappans at Lothal calculate the tides with such precision? What specific engineering knowledge was lost when Carthage fell? Each excavation, Each sonar survey of a submerged ruin adds another piece to a puzzle that helps us understand not just the past, but the enduring logic of our interconnected world. These stone labyrinths remind us that our global system has very deep roots. If this voyage into the foundations of maritime history resonated with you, we would love to hear which harbor story amazed you the most. Was it the secret naval fortress of Carthage, or the monsoon-chasing audacity of Arikamedu? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more deep dives into the hidden infrastructures that built our world, be sure to subscribe. Thank you for joining this exploration. Sometimes the most profound changes in human history begin not with a treaty or a battle, but with a simple, stubborn pile of stones placed carefully in the water.